childhood spent under shelling.
I'm scared. It's so cold.
Homes and schools lie in ruins. And instead of comprehensive education, there's Russian ideology in classrooms.
Familiar subjects like Ukrainian language, literature, and history were no longer on the schedule.
And the attempt to turn Ukrainian children into future obedient Putin soldiers.
Right now, everything there is propaganda.
What the occupiers have turned education and upbringing into in the captured territories. What methods they use to poison young minds. And what consequences this will have for an entire generation. Watch the special report, The Kremlin Curriculum. Indoctrination under occupation. Having occupied Ukrainian territories, Russia threw all its efforts into indoctrinating children and youth with its ideology. The occupiers are destroying Ukrainian identity by banning the use of the Ukrainian language, cutting off access to literature, history, and cultural traditions. Instead, Russian educational programs are imposed in schools, and in their free time, children are herded into various organizations to cultivate loyalty to the Russian and occupation regime.
Schools are already functioning, flagship schools have been designated, new textbooks have been delivered, new equipment is being supplied, and that will continue. School and college renovations are underway. Teacher qualifications are being improved.
The occupiers' priority was to reformat schools, despite the chaos in bombed-out towns and villages in housing, healthcare, and social services.
When we returned to school, the first thing that caught the eye was that all Ukrainian flags inside were taken down, and there were no portraits of Ukrainian writers or the Ukrainian anthem on the walls. Everything was covered in Russian symbols.
On top of that, the curriculum had new subjects.
The familiar subjects like Ukrainian language, Ukrainian literature, or history were no longer in the schedule. Instead, new subjects appeared like Russian language, Russian literature, Russian history.
A bit later, they added lessons on something called Donbas citizenship.
All these lessons told the same things as on TV. That Ukraine attacked us is killing us, and that Russian soldiers are supposedly saving the population, that Donbas was always historically Russian and will forever be part of Russia. They talked about neo-Nazis, the hostile West. It was disgusting to listen to.
To protect their daughter from Russian propaganda, Ksenia's parents transferred her to online learning. Not going to school at all wasn't an option. It was a mandatory condition from the occupying authorities. If violated, parents could be taken to the basement, or as they now say, sent to the cellars.
I wasn't planning to go back to school because the propaganda there was extremely aggressive. But even during remote learning, we couldn't escape it. We had this teacher who was in charge of organizing events. She constantly sent our homeroom teachers links to various broadcasts or events, usually featuring Putin or some official. We were required to watch and take a photo of ourselves with the live stream in the background. They would then post these photos on the school's website. I really didn't want to do it because I knew that one day I'd leave the occupied territory and I'd be ashamed of what might be associated with my name. So I just ignored it. As a result, they called my parents, asking, "Why isn't your daughter sending the photo? Are you hiding something?"
Participation in events for Soviet and Russian holidays was also mandatory. Sometimes it got more attention than the lessons themselves.
We celebrated every Russian holiday at school. Russian Constitution Day, Remembrance Day. The occupiers especially prepared for May 9th. We learned Soviet songs, strange poems. They made us wear St. George ribbons, lay flowers at mass graves, and told us that it was the Russians who won World War II.
Later, they added talks about the important, patriotism lessons in the context of the so-called special military operation. Entire lessons were dedicated to the so-called joining of new territories.
This was the first lesson on Mondays. It was important and mandatory. First, they played the anthem and we had to memorize it and sing it. Then came the lesson. At first, our homeroom teacher forced us to attend. She showed presentations about some events in Russia. What was happening at the front, something about Putin. But later, the homeroom teacher began trying to skip the lesson. She'd let us sleep through it and come only for the second period. Thanks to her, I wasn't so deeply immersed in these topics and don't remember much from those lessons.
Ivan knows firsthand how Russian education affects a child's still forming perception. When Russian troops invaded Luhansk, he was only 7. He had time to spend just 1 year in a Ukrainian school, to see the Ukrainian flag at the school ceremony, and sing the national anthem.
From 2nd grade, I went to an LNR school. I found out my city was occupied, that we lived under occupation, about the ATO-OOS zone, only when I was much older and met kids from Dnipro on social media. Before that, both at school and at home, they told me we were good Ukrainians who supported Russia and lived in it, and that those who didn't support it were traitors.
Since the age of 7, Ivan had been studying under the Russian curriculum. Until he was 15, he had no knowledge of Ukrainian history or the Ukrainian language. Those subjects had been removed from the school program. In their place were Russian language and the history of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic.
Our teacher was very pro-Russian. She told us many times that Ukraine started the war, that Ukraine was bombing us. What stuck with me most was that she said she hated Ukrainians from Western Ukraine the most, especially from Lviv. She told us that during World War II, German troops didn't bomb Lviv. She said that to prove that Ukrainians were always Nazis, and that's why Lviv wasn't bombed.
Beyond lessons, children also helped the militants weaving camouflage nets, making trench candles, collecting aid, and visiting military hospitals.
We had one teacher who organized it all. On Easter, she collected Easter cakes, and we brought them to hospitals with our classmates where Russian soldiers were. Later, she started collecting money for drones for the Russian army.
This same reprogramming scenario was applied by the occupiers to newly captured territories.
Right now, everything there is propaganda, and everything is focused on learning how to shoot, how to kill.
Anna But dedicated 23 years of her life to working at the Melitopol Vocational Agricultural Lyceum. She taught children civil law, biology, and German. In 2022, when Russian occupiers entered her hometown of Melitopol, she was forced to leave her job and flee the city.
The occupiers entered our lyceum, lived in our dormitories, burned all Ukrainian flags, destroyed all Ukrainian books, and used our embroidered shirts to mop the floors. We had 6 vocational lyceums. Only one remains.
After the mass exodus and refusals to work under the Russian system by teachers who didn't support the occupation, the so-called new authorities filled schools with random people, with no experience, and often with no education at all. The class schedules of students are often limited to 34 lessons of the same subject per day, that is, Russian language, literature, and history. The hard and natural sciences like chemistry, physics, and biology are nearly completely excluded from the curriculum. Instead, mandatory classes like military training have been introduced, for example, under the name Fundamentals of Safety and Defense of the Motherland.
Every day they instill in children of all age groups that Ukrainians are Nazis, that it is Ukrainians bombing these cities, that people are dying because of Ukraine. On Russian holidays, they are forced to memorize poems about how we are such friendly Russians. how we want everyone to be together. All the students are weaving nets for Russian soldiers, required to bring treats for Russian soldiers, write them letters, draw pictures, make trench candles, and craft various items, and just try to say anything against it.
The cherry on top are cadet classes. They are being opened in general education schools across the board. And this is not just another tool for raising Ukrainian children in the spirit of Russian ultra-patriotism. This is preparation of a personnel reserve for the Army and Special Services from early childhood.
The number of such classes is growing rapidly. If previously they were aimed at teenagers who already had some understanding and critical thinking, now we see the emergence of cadet classes, even in preschools.
According to the Human Rights Center for Civic Education, Almenda, over 108 such classes are operating in the temporarily occupied territories.
Usually, these classes are under the patronage of a particular agency. It could be the Ministry of Emergency Situations, the Investigative Committee, the FSB, or other security structures. The uniforms the children wear match those of the respective agency. The main goal of these classes is to ensure that after finishing school, the child sees no future other than serving in that structure.
Another tool for influencing school children are various children's and youth organizations. Joining such movements is mandatory, as is participation in events. Their policy in the occupied territories is even more aggressive than in Russia itself. The development of these programs is a priority for the occupation authorities. Their funding is increased every year. Eaglets of Russia, a children's movement created in 2021 in Russia. After the occupation of Ukrainian territories, its branches appeared in all seized regions. According to Almenda, the number of involved children has reached 50,000.
They love it. Our biggest achievement so far is that they've learned all our tracks, our anthem, and every morning we dance the Eaglet dance. They're very excited about it.
The movement targets younger students, grades 1 to 4. It's the first step in forming the young Putinist.
Eaglets are a modern-day version of Soviet little Octobrists, meant to instill community service habits and start ideological grooming. Children are taught to collect scrap metal, taken to ideological lessons to the Young Guard Museum, told about heroes of the war. It's pre-ideological indoctrination.
To cheerful songs, they are taught love for the so-called new motherland and, so to speak, the proper, traditional Russian values.
The Eaglets are a way to make school children feel involved in a greater cause, patriotic upbringing, and forming young leaders from an early age.
It's a massive system of child involvement designed to make a child obedient to the regime so that later they become part of the Russian Federation without hesitation, join the investigative committee or other government bodies, for example.
Those not recruited from the cradle into the Eaglets are pressured into joining one of the most promoted Russian youth programs, now spreading to occupied territories, the Movement of the First.
Through schools, children are recruited into these organizations, and then the organizations work with them in after-school hours. This ensures the child is constantly under the influence of Russian propaganda.
The ideological indoctrination is disguised under the noble goal of cultivating leadership qualities.
For Movement of the First activists, a patriotic lesson was held. Children and teens learned about the symbols of Russia and their region, as well as historical facts. Staff and activists hosted a civil patriotic game called Union of Peoples.
When we talk about Movement of the First, they work on children's consciousness. It's about political indoctrination, pushing Russian identity in invisible, soft ways via literature clubs, film clubs, volunteer work, hikes, eco-actions, or forums. On the surface, it seems harmless, but during these activities, they insert pro-Russian narratives that Ukraine and Ukrainianness never existed, that the occupied territories are historically Russian, that they are protecting their people and never start wars. Because of this deeper psychological work, it's the most dangerous.
Drill training, red berets, and beige uniforms. Russia has deployed its militaristic youth organization, Yunarmiya, to the occupied territories. Its goal, normalize war and prepare youth for military service in the Russian armed forces. The program includes basic military training, handling drones, assembling rifles.
Yunarmiya is a special movement fully militarized. Its near-strategic goal is to teach kids to use all types of weapons. The occupiers need it to replenish human resources. Part of these children will go directly into the Russian army. Others will become career soldiers. And those who don't will receive ideological training to embrace the regime's moral and spiritual values laid out in Putin's decree.
Another way to instill love for Russia: summer camps during school breaks. In summer 2025, Russian authorities plan to send over 65,000 children from temporarily occupied territories to these camps. The geography from Vladivostok to Novorossiysk. Important detail. For children from the so-called new regions, everything from housing to food is free.
Russian camps borrow the re-education strategy from the Soviet Union to remove a child from their usual environment, immerse them in an indoctrinating one, reshape them as the regime sees fit, and return them home where they, in turn, begin to re-educate their own parents. Our organization has already documented over 100 such institutions where children are systematically taken from occupied territories.
50 children from Makivka, Donetsk region, were taken 2,500 kilometers from home to Khanty-Mansi, autonomous Okrug Yugra, Surgut district. The official purpose was health improvement.
Я делаю все это в первый раз. Например, тут и кислородные коктейли дают, и мероприятия разные, новые игры.
Besides games, they held so-called lessons in courage with war criminals. Under such sensitive supervision, children were taught first aid, how to assemble rifles and operate drones.
Разбирали автоматы мы тут, нашел много новых друзей, стреляли по мишеням, лазертаг играли.
They noted how warmly the children of the North welcomed them. When they were leaving, the kids cried. They had truly bonded.
Top-performing students in academics or sports are sent to elite camps. One such camp, Ocean, in Vladivostok. In 2023, the Gauleiter of Kherson region, Volodymyr Saldo, signed an agreement to send children 10,000 kilometers from home.
Even the journey itself is a perfect opportunity for Russians to indoctrinate and reprogram the child.
The camp emphasizes participation in special educational programs with elements of military patriotic training. Also meetings with officials who lure teens with stories about the benefits of studying in Russia, particularly in its Far East.
We will be showing how our secondary and vocational education is structured, what our federal university is like because we are not hiding it. We would like some of these children to later come study and live in Primorsky Krai. And in that regard, we would only be glad.
Representatives of local authorities often come to the children and, right on camera, express interest in Ukrainian children, that these children should later come, enroll in universities, create families here, and never return, because what they're after is human resources. Yes, not for participation in the war, but for populating the territory, for improving the demographic situation. In this context, Ukrainian children become a kind of instrument for achieving the Russian Federation's national interests.
Children from the temporarily occupied territories are systematically taken on trips to Russia. 2 entire programs were created for this. One of them is MAP 4+85.
It's an analog of the Pushkin card. Children are taken in organized groups for 7 to 9 days to places of historical glory of the Russian Federation, or to monuments of its history.
Just over the past few years, according to the Center for Civic Education, Almenda, more than 30,000 children have participated in such programs. And here are the results.
I saw everything I wanted. This trip meant so much to me.
Such powerful emotions about this city.
I will definitely visit again in the future and maybe even live here.
When you're taken on a trip with your classmates, and it's so much fun you're without your parents, going to iconic places, often receiving gifts, coming back happy, it's obvious children enjoy it. And it strengthens the effect of this brainwashing. Children return and repeat Russian narratives, that Russia is not the aggressor who started the war, but that Ukraine is committing war crimes, and Russia is simply protecting civilians.
Under the guise of patriotic excursions, middle and high school students are now being taken to Russia's Kursk region directly to the front line. There, under the pretense of honoring victims of Ukrainian aggression, teenagers will be shown destroyed homes and fake eyewitnesses.
They try to bring them to the scene and say, look, the Ukrainians destroyed everything here, for example, in Kursk region. When in reality, it was Russian soldiers liberating some regions and destroying everything according to the classic, traditional Russian military pattern. All buildings, all shelters, along with civilians. Children take this all in. They come back and say, Mom, Dad, why did you tell me Ukrainian soldiers were good? I saw it with my own eyes. I don't believe you anymore. It works. Kids think, surely adults wouldn't lie that much, wouldn't fake everything, wouldn't set up phony witnesses. But that's the thing, Russia, its special services and Kremlin regime, this is exactly how they work. They stage lies in the most convincing way.
The people who take children on excursions are usually very well trained to use the time as effectively as possible to change the child's consciousness.
Refuse to go on excursions? Not join youth organizations? Not enroll in a Russian school? Any sign of disagreement is equated with disloyalty to the regime and brings consequences for the whole family.
Article 63 of the Family Code of the Russian Federation states that if parents do not enroll their child in a Russian educational institution, this may call into question their fulfillment of parental rights. The same applies to organized trips or joining organizations. If they refuse, a special commission is created, which then decides whether to issue the family a warning, or, for example, transfer the case to the authorities to terminate parental rights.
The actions of the Russian Federation in the occupied territories of Ukraine are a cynical encroachment on the rights of Ukrainian children and a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. These actions directly violate the Fourth Geneva Convention, which obliges an occupying power to respect local laws, cultural identity, and ensure the proper functioning of educational institutions. They also contradict Article 29 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which guarantees the right to education that respects national identity and language. Russia's education policy in the occupied territories is not just a textbook swap. It may qualify as a war crime.
We need universal jurisdiction cases in other countries, especially those where the concept of cultural genocide exists, because actions aimed at erasing Ukrainian identity may be legally classified as such. We also need processes at the level of the International Criminal Court. This treatment, which exhibits signs of inhumane and improper treatment of children, causing mental suffering, may be recognized as a crime against humanity and must be recognized as such.
The The UN monitoring mission in Ukraine has confirmed violations by Russia and noted in its reports that the Russian system ignores the cultural needs of Ukrainian children, and the forced militarization in schools, participation in propaganda events, and militarist youth organizations are egregious violations of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Ukrainian children who have ended up in the hands of the occupying totalitarian regime, and according to various estimates, that's no fewer than 1.5 million, are not just victims, but instruments in the hands of the Kremlin. The Russian authorities, using fear, manipulation, lies, and reprogramming of young minds, are trying to erase Ukrainian identity. The goal of the bloodthirsty dictator is to raise a generation on occupied lands that is blindly loyal to Russia's imperial ambitions. Putin is personally responsible for this criminal policy. For the forced deportation, or simply put, the abduction of Ukrainian children, an arrest warrant has already been issued by the International Criminal Court. The forced indoctrination of children in occupation, depriving them of their culture and historical memory, turning them into obedient soldiers, is part of the same chain of criminal genocidal practices under international law. And for this, Putin and his rabid regime will also have to answer. Marina Nestorova, Special Report.